the world's greatest empire. But it wasn't built in a day. The rise, the fall, the conquerors, the conquered. Rome.
Hello, I'm Joe Mantegna. For over 600 years, Rome was the most magnificent city in the ancient world, the capital of the mighty Roman Empire. But with the rise of Emperor Constantine the Great, a second capital was built in the east that would soon sound the death knell for the eternal city. The empire was changing. Along the way, a new faith was born, a religion that would conquer the empire and leave its mark on the world. This was the mystical land of Jupiter, Apollo, and Mars, Mithras, Isis, and Cybele, a world of astrologers, magicians, and miracle workers. This was the Roman Empire, where people believed in many gods and many religions. But in the empire's Middle Eastern province of Judea lived the Jews, who prayed to a single God, rejecting all others. Their religion was Judaism. The Jews believed that a Messiah would appear and save them from their troubles, but many disagreed over when this Messiah would come. By 30 BC, a number of Jewish teachers and visionaries were heralded as the Messiah. One of them was a Jewish preacher named Jesus. A self-proclaimed healer and miracle worker, Jesus attracted many followers who were looking for a new religion, a faith that could comfort them from their miseries on earth and promise them a glorious afterlife.
I think what we have to understand is that Jesus is one of many religious leaders in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD who have very similar stories told about them. The problem that a Roman historian faces in dealing with Jesus is that his claims to divinity and his miracle stories against the background of the 1st and 2nd century are commonplace. They are not remarkable. They do not stand out.
At the time, not all the citizens of Jerusalem believed Jesus was their Savior. Jewish religious leaders had publicly protested that Jesus was breaking their laws, claiming to be the Messiah and the Son of God. In response to numerous complaints, Jesus was arrested and brought before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of the region.
The trial of Jesus was clearly a matter of high importance in the immediate region in which it occurred. Pilate's principal concern, like that of any Roman governor abroad, was to keep the lid on any explosive situation in his province, because if it got out of hand, the governor, Pilate in this case, was going to be the one whose head was going to roll for not maintaining stability. And it was Pilate in the end, there's no question, who delivered the judgment. Crucifixion is a Roman penalty. It's not a Jewish penalty.
Fearing possible political repercussions from the Emperor Tiberius back in Rome, Pontius Pilate condemned Jesus to death. He was forced to carry a heavy wooden cross through the streets of Jerusalem and to a hill where he was bound and crucified, along with 2 other criminals of the state.
Let's get one thing about Jesus Christ absolutely straight. Hardly anyone noticed that he was crucified when he was crucified. This was a moment which passed amidst the thousands of other executions going on of various criminals and renegades around the Roman Empire. What's overwhelmingly interesting about Pontius Pilate is that he's disinterested in Jesus. He was another Jew who claimed to be a Messiah, to be leading another resistance movement. He was one of many with whom the Roman authorities had to deal.
The crucifixion of Jesus would have hardly made a ripple in the center of power, which was Rome. It wouldn't have made a great impact at all because Judea was a far-off place, a poor province, important in certain ways strategically, but certainly not central to Roman power.
According to the Bible, the man named Jesus died in 33 AD at the age of 33. But almost 3 centuries would pass before his name, Christos, meaning Messiah, became the name of a new faith called Christianity, a religion that changed the course of Roman history and the world.
Christianity became powerful over a long period of time. It begins as a type of Jewish religion or Jewish sect. It then expands out to non-Jews, and then Christianity begins to separate itself from Judaism and become a religion of its own.
One of the earliest Christian missionaries was a Greek Jew named Paul, who never actually met Jesus. Decades after his crucifixion, Paul embarked on an aggressive mission across the Near Eastern Roman provinces and into Greece. He spoke to Jews and Gentiles alike, encouraging them to convert to the new religion of Christianity. With the persistence of missionaries like Paul, small Christian communities developed throughout the empire.
The rise of Christianity, of course, is one of the major events of the Roman imperial period. Why it actually happens is very hard to say, and of course it partly depends on one's own religious orientation. There were quite a lot of quite similar religious cults at the time which have features very similar to Christianity, not least religions which gave a sense of why one is in the world and a promise of an afterlife. Why particularly Christianity? It was perhaps to some extent in the right place at the right time.
For the most part, Romans were allowed to practice any religion, so long as they at the same time worshipped the gods of the Roman state, especially Jupiter, the guardian spirit of the emperor. Roman Christians and Jews increasingly refused to participate in public sacrifices to the Roman gods. But unlike the Jews, the Christians were aggressive in recruiting converts. By the end of the 3rd century, the Christians had recruited members from a host of other religious groups, including those from within the Jewish communities. They even recruited soldiers in the Roman army.
What happened during the course of the 3rd century was that there was civil war and anarchy and invasion. And the government, which had supported all of these urban centers, began to collapse. When that happened, the relative strength of these small Christian organizations became greater. So the power of these Christian churches during the course of the 3rd century, as the government sank into anarchy, became stronger and stronger.
Over the centuries, certain emperors became increasingly intolerant of other religions. In 202 AD, Emperor Septimius Severus banned any Roman citizen from converting to Judaism or Christianity. Those who disobeyed his decree were executed in the amphitheaters by soldiers or wild animals.
Their executions became sports events. They were covered with wild animal skins and torn apart by dogs. Tacitus.
One of the most rabid persecutors of Christians was Diocletian. Born in the province of Dalmatia, the illiterate soldier fought for his empire and eventually succeeded to the imperial throne in the late 3rd century. But over time, Diocletian felt no longer equipped to handle his expansive empire, which included 44 provinces of diverse cultures and beliefs. In 286 AD, Diocletian created a tetrarchy, whereby 4 emperors would share leadership over the empire. Emperors Diocletian and Galerius ruled the eastern provinces. The western provinces were controlled by emperors Maximian and Constantius.
The Roman Empire had never really been one completely united whole in all senses. It was always divided into regions, and there were two sort of super regions. There was the Latin-speaking west of Italy and the Western Balkans and parts of North Africa, whole of Western Europe on the one hand, and then there was the Greek East, which included Old Greece, the eastern seaboard of the Mediterranean world, and all of those other provinces at that end of the Roman Empire. So there were linguistic differences. So in a sense, there was perhaps always a fault line between East and West.
Two of the four ruling emperors, Diocletian and Galerius, instigated an anti-Christian movement. Christians were forbidden from worshiping publicly in groups. Bibles were outlawed. These emperors also imposed torture and death to any Roman citizen who refused to honor the state gods. Thousands of Christians were martyred during this 10-year movement. At the same time, thousands of others recanted their Christian beliefs in order to save their lives. Despite the threat of persecution by emperors Diocletian and Galerius, the numbers of Christians were growing. In 305 AD, the original Tetrarchy finally disbanded. Two of the emperors abdicated. Two others eventually died. 4 new emperors became heirs to the throne, but each emperor would be ousted by one cunning man who would forever change the Roman Empire. In 310 AD, 4 new emperors ascended to the imperial throne, but one would eventually seize total power. His name was Flavius Valerius Constantinus, better known as Constantine the Great.
For no one was comparable to him for grace and beauty of person, or height of stature, and he so far surpassed his compeers in personal strength as to be a terror to them. Eusebius.
Constantine was born in 285 AD in Nicomedia, which is now northwestern Turkey. His father, Constantius I, had been one of the emperors chosen for Diocletian's Tetrarchy. The younger Constantine was a bold and ruthless man who was broad and stocky in appearance. With the death of his father, Constantine took advantage of the army's loyalty to his father in Britain to get himself proclaimed as one of Rome's 4 emperors. Constantine co-ruled the western provinces with Emperor Maxentius. The eastern territories were ruled by Emperors Licinius and Maximinus Daia. From the beginning, Constantine had no interest in sharing the throne. He plotted to crush the other rulers one by one. In 312 AD, he set out to destroy Maxentius. The armies of both emperors met face to face near the Milvian Bridge in the city of Rome. At the time, Constantine had no strong feelings for Christians one way or another. He had always worshipped the Roman sun god Apollo, but his ideas about Christianity were about to change. During the gruesome battle with Maxentius, the Milvian Bridge collapsed from the weight of the soldiers. Masses of men drowned in the muddy river due to the weight of their armor. Constantine's army felt hopeless and near defeat when suddenly a strange phenomenon occurred. Constantine was overcome by a magnificent light in the sky. Constantine said the light was in the shape of the letters X and P, which in Greek are the first letters of the word Christ. Below the glowing symbol were the words, "Under this shalt thou conquer." A heavenly voice then ordered Constantine to use this symbol in all future battles with his enemies. Constantine interpreted this as a sign from Jesus Christ. He instructed his men to paint their shields with this symbol. The next day, his army went on to defeat Maxentius, making him sole ruler of the western provinces. From that moment on, Constantine professed his devotion to Christianity.
By the time Constantine comes to power in the early 4th century, Christianity was a very powerful religion. And some historians claim that any emperor who was going to be powerful in the early 4th century would have to have played up in one way or another to the Christians. Whether or not that was the case, or whether or not Constantine is the pivotal figure who, by using his influence and patronage as emperor, shifted the tide towards Christianity, is a question that's still hotly debated among historians.
It's important to remember that for Constantine, there was nothing special about Christianity. It could be used politically. To talk religion in this empire is to talk politics. To talk politics is to talk religion.
Constantine's conversion to Christianity, whether it was due to divine intervention or political motivation, remains a mystery. But Christianity quickly became his crusade.
Christianity achieves success as a Roman religion because Christianity is a religion of war. Constantine, as a Christian, looks to the Christian God as a god of battles.
In 311 AD, Christianity was finally legalized throughout the empire. In 313 AD, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, which gave Christians the right to worship the God that they wanted to worship. The 10-year persecution of Christians had finally ceased. While Constantine was gaining control of the West, Emperor Licinius had defeated his co-ruler Maximinus Daia in the East. The Roman Empire now had only 2 emperors. In a shrewd propaganda campaign, Constantine turned the ever-growing Christian populace against Licinius. Backed by his Christian coalition, Constantine and his men crushed Licinius's army. Constantine emerged as sole ruler of the Roman Empire.
I think what's important about understanding Constantine's support to Christianity is that it occurs within a civil war situation. It became a Christian emperor prosecuting his religion against pagan persecutors. From that point of view, Christianity was a godsend for Constantine.
Because Constantine was militarily successful, that demonstrated that his God had real power. He could deliver the goods. And this is what Constantine says in a letter that he writes to the king of Persia. He says, "Look at my career. I start out in Britain. I'm the ruler of the Roman world. How's it happened? It's because I worship the true God." And Constantine says, look, if you've got any sense, you should start worshipping this God too.
Constantine's military victories gained him thousands of Christian converts. As a result, the emperor pushed through his own political and religious reforms. In 324 AD, he banned pagan sacrifices and pillaged pagan temples of their wealth. A merciless leader, he also passed strict laws of conduct. Jews were forbidden to own Christian slaves. Elopement was illegal. Convicted rapists were burned alive.
Having gained control, he then sets about administering it in the way that suits him, suits his religious beliefs. And he starts issuing a very important and very interesting series of Christian laws. He becomes personally involved in matters of church organization and church discipline. He gives the Christian church phenomenal wealth that transforms the status of Christianity throughout the Roman world.
But Constantine himself was far from pious. In 324 AD, he had his son, Crispus, executed for allegedly committing adultery. Constantine later learned that his wife, Fausta, had plotted Crispus's death so her sons from a previous marriage could become heirs to his throne. Enraged by his wife's scheme, Constantine had her suffocated in her own bath. Constantine's mother, Helen, a devout Christian, told her son he must redeem himself for the murders against his family by building Christian churches. Constantine obeyed his mother's request by erecting churches throughout the empire. Two of the grandest were the original St. Peter's Church in Rome and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. In time, Constantine's building projects would take on a grander scale. Since the 3rd century AD, the city of Rome had been losing its power and influence within the empire. Past emperors had been spending most of their time leading battles in the frontier provinces of the north and east. Constantine decided he needed a new residence, and the empire needed another capital. In 324 AD, Constantine began building a second imperial capital. He chose the city of Byzantium, located between Asia and Europe in what is now Turkey. In time, this relatively unknown eastern city would become the New Rome. In 324, the city of Byzantium became the eastern capital of the Roman Empire. The city was renamed Constantinople after Constantine himself. Chosen for its strategic location, Byzantium was formerly a prosperous trading port, bordering the Mediterranean and Black Seas. Constantine instituted a major building program in Constantinople. He wanted to make his new capital even more splendid than the city of Rome.
We're standing in what would have been the Acropolis, the fortified center of the Greek city, originally Greek city of Byzantium. His purpose in choosing Constantinople is its access to Anatolia and also its access via flows to the River Danube, the two areas where the biggest threats were coming to for the whole of the Roman Empire.
Before Constantinople, no one had ever heard of Byzantium. In founding Constantinople, Constantine is making an important statement. It's a new capital that makes the statement about power that Constantine wants to make. It's a new capital away from the suffocating, snobbish, pagan aristocracy of Rome, a new capital where the new Christian elite of Constantine's empire can live.
By 330 AD, Constantinople was a Christian city. Clergy, monks, and nuns roamed the congested streets. Churches dominated its skyline. Constantine continued to build up his constituency of Christians. The emperor even provided financial incentives, such as tax breaks to priests and bishops. Christianity had become the empire's dominant religion because of its political support from the emperor. But Constantine's personal religious beliefs were full of contradictions.
Constantine, of course, continued to worship the sun god even after his conversion to Christianity. That should not surprise us for a moment. Constantine's conversion to Christianity is not a confirmation class. He doesn't embrace Christianity like a modern, pious, church-going Christian. Constantine continues, as many Christians did with him, to worship the sun god Apollo.
Like many Romans, Constantine had practiced Christianity, as well as the traditional Roman state religion, throughout his adult life. But in April of 337 AD, the emperor became gravely ill. He requested a bishop to formally baptize him. When Constantine died, his body was buried in a mausoleum in the Church of the 12 Apostles at Constantinople, where he claimed himself to be the 13th apostle. In death, Constantine had formally become a Christian.
An interesting thing about Constantine is that, as we know, he didn't convert to Christianity until he was on his deathbed. And the reason being that he could, as emperor, execute people without feeling guilty. He wasn't breaking any one of the 10 Commandments.
Constantine's legacy, I think, can be very simply put. Without Constantine, Christianity would not have become the dominant religion of the Roman Empire. He's chiefly responsible for that. Without his imperial backing, it's difficult to see how Christianity could have flourished as effectively or as rapidly as it did. What we regard, even in the Protestant faith, as the basic tenets of Christian belief, our basic understanding of Jesus Christ, is worked out under Constantine. So he's very present, even in our modern thinking about Christianity.
Almost 60 years after Constantine's death, Christianity was still flourishing, but the empire had changed. In 395 AD, the Roman Empire had formally split, dividing east and west.
The East, generally speaking, consisted of lands which for many centuries had had sophisticated cities. They were rich, they were very populous, and in this again they were quite different from many areas of the Western Empire, which was much more rural, fewer towns, more recently established towns. So it's not surprising, given their widely differing geographical distributions and their different natures, that perhaps there will be a tendency for the two halves to drift apart.
However, by the 6th century, the Western Empire no longer existed as it once had. Various barbarian tribes had ravaged and seized the provinces of Western Europe and North Africa. They also sacked the eternal city of Rome, the cradle of the Roman Empire, the place where it all began.
Rome has fallen, but it is not 1 hour since she was feeding from my hand. Procopius.
In my opinion, the real reason the Western Roman Empire falls and the Eastern Roman Empire survives is a question of luck, really. That luck and geography, which means that Constantinople has all its richest territories behind it, all its tax base. The same is not true of Rome. All its taxation areas, the area from which it draws funds to pay for the army, which obviously defends the territory, all of those lie in front of Rome, in Spain and in France. In other words, the barbarians can get at them.
The Western Empire lost its imperial power, but the Eastern Empire remained intact. The Roman state encompassed the countries of modern Turkey, Greece, Egypt, Syria, and the territories up to the lower Danube River. Many of the eastern provinces were partially protected by the sea, unlike the fallen western provinces, whose frontiers directly bordered the barbarian peoples of northern and central Europe.
The eastern half of the empire has annexed to itself the best revenue-generating provinces. And this is quite an important factor in the long-term decline of the West and the collapse of the Western Empire.
The capital of Constantinople was still the center of power. But after 6 centuries, one Eastern emperor would stand last in the great line of imperial rulers. His name was Justinian. In 527 AD, Justin, the reigning emperor of the Mediterranean world, had passed away. He willed his throne to his nephew, Justinian I. Justinian formerly held the office of consul in Constantinople. He was intellectually astute and had spent most of his life reaping the benefits of his uncle's imperial power. Now, Justinian was in charge of all that remained of the Roman Empire. Justinian's loyal partner was his strong-willed wife, Theodora. The emperor was wildly in love with his empress, but the marriage shocked the nobility living in Constantinople. Theodora had been a prostitute and a dancer in a circus troupe. What worried the city's aristocracy even more than her torrid past was the influence Theodora had over her husband when it came to matters of the state.
Politically, of course, Theodora was the power behind the throne. She was the Nancy Reagan at the court of Constantinople in the middle of the 6th century. It was impossible to get to the emperor without going to Theodora. She had a considerable influence on all of his policies. Perhaps one might properly say of Theodora that she did not stand behind Justinian's throne, but right in front of it.
She had an attractive face and a good figure. She was in a great hurry to get into her bath and very unwilling to get out again. She would sleep for hours on end. And though she had strayed thus into every path of self-indulgence for so great a part of the day, she thought fit to run the whole of the Roman Empire. Procopius.
That horror is reflected in the secret history written by Procopius, purporting to tell us of what actually happened behind the closed doors in the Oval Office of the Imperial Palace at Constantinople. Here, Theodora is criticized for her henpecking of her husband Justinian, her insatiable sexual appetites. But we don't have to believe that. There's an alternative vision of Theodora as a good empress, as a pious empress who looked after the poor, who was concerned to prosecute Christianity throughout the empire.
Justinian and Theodora wielded absolute power and authority over the citizens of Constantinople. Visitors to the imperial palace had to crawl on their hands and knees to the throne and kiss the shoes of the emperor. Justinian took on the daunting task of reorganizing the Roman laws of the empire's past 4 centuries. The laws were recodified and published into a book called the Digest of Roman Law. These publications were an effort to legally prosecute the lawless behavior in the city. Justinian targeted his tough-on-crime laws towards some of his unruly supporters whom had been known to riot. The most catastrophic of these incidents occurred in the city's Hippodrome Theater. There, chariot races were held, the World Cup soccer matches of the ancient world. Chariot teams typically competed for prizes and money, but in 532 AD, the competition turned violent when the fans of the blue and green teams began quarreling with each other.
The Blues accused the Greens of organizing a series of mafia-style assassinations in the city. The Greens retaliated by saying the Blues had done the same thing, but they would be protected because the Emperor Justinian was a well-known supporter of the Blues.
City officials tried to suppress the tension by ordering the immediate execution of 7 criminals from both the blue and green factions. The accused were dragged into the arena, but the executions backfired. The nooses snapped, and the men escaped. Rather than taming the crowd, the incident provoked a massive riot. Angry fans yelled out, "Nika! Nika!" which was the charioteers' victory cry. Mobs took to the streets and torched buildings until the city was a flaming inferno. The crowds still left in the Hippodrome cried out for the execution of their emperor, Justinian, who was sitting in his royal box with Theodora. Justinian wanted to flee the city, but Theodora held him back.
If now it is your wish to save yourself, O Emperor, it is no problem. However, having saved yourself, consider the day will not come when you will exchange that security for death. As for myself, I appreciate a certain ancient saying that royalty is a good burial shroud. Theodora.
Theodora plays a key role in the Nika riot. At the moment at which a usurper is set up in the Hippodrome, Justinian wishes to flee the palace, to run from Constantinople. It's Theodora who forces him to stand his ground. Without Theodora, Justinian, I think, at that moment would have lost his throne. He owes 50 years more rule to her and her courage at that moment.
And so Justinian decided at that particular time on a rather ingenious way of solving this problem of the revolting people in the Hippodrome. Quite simply, he locked the gates, he sent his army in, and 30,000 people were killed in cold blood, the supporters of the Blues and the Greens, and that was the end of the revolt.
The Nika riot ended, but the violent incident left the city buried in ash and rubble. Rather than despair, Justinian saw the destruction as an opportunity to rebuild Constantinople to be even more magnificent than it had previously been. He authorized an expansive building project, including the reconstruction of the St. Sophia Church, one of the architectural wonders of Constantinople.
This church of Hagia Sophia, built by the Emperor Justinian and his wife Theodora, it took them 5 years to complete this. It's a remarkably short period of time for such a large structure. Looking at it, you see what was the largest dome in antiquity. What I always find rather interesting about this building, however, is in the concept of modern Turkish architecture. This building, converted into a mosque when the Ottoman sultans took command of Constantinople, became the prototype for so many later mosques.
The remains that we see in modern Istanbul are principally those of Justinian's building project. 2.5 centuries after Constantine, the Roman Empire is more stably Christian. Constantinople has been a wealthy capital for 2 centuries now, and Justinian capitalizes on that in beautifying the city in a much more securely Christian way.
After rebuilding Constantinople, Justinian focused his attentions abroad. Since taking over the imperial throne, his dream had been to reclaim the western provinces that had fallen to the barbarians. In 527 AD, Justinian set out to reunite the East and West. Justinian possessed a burning desire to restore the Roman Empire to its former glory, a powerful empire which controlled the entire Mediterranean basin and beyond. Sparing no expense, Justinian ordered his army to reconquer the Western Empire, province by province.
Justinian has one single, lifelong, lasting ambition, and that's to reunite the Roman Empire. That's what lies behind his attempts to reconquer Italy, to regain Africa from the barbarian Vandals. His lasting mission is to restore the Mediterranean world to its former Romanness, to break out of the Eastern Mediterranean, to move west, to recreate the Empire of Augustus. Justinian is the last emperor who tries, who attempts, and who nearly succeeds in reforging the Roman Empire. Under Justinian, this is the last chance that a failing empire has to restore the territorial limits and the unity that went with the Empire of Augustus.
But while Justinian's troops were off trying to reclaim the Western Empire, the Eastern Empire was being threatened by the Persians, who bordered the eastern provinces. The Eastern Empire was now on the verge of collapse. Justinian's world was crumbling around him. In 548 AD, his wife and soulmate, Theodora, died. With her gone, Justinian lost his will to live.
They were in love. And it was a marriage, I think, importantly, founded on a great degree of equality between the emperor and the empress. He was grief-stricken when she died of cancer in 548. If one wants to think about how one might describe their relationship, there's a wonderful opening to a law of Justinian's, which says that marriage is founded on mutual affection. It doesn't require a dowry. I like to think of that as a description of their relationship.
Justinian found the inner strength to live on for 17 years after the death of his beloved wife. But the price paid to strengthen his empire had taken its toll on his people. Justinian had placed a heavy taxation on Roman citizens to pay off foreigners from invading the empire. But his tax plan eventually bled the provinces dry of their resources. In 565 AD, Justinian finally died. With him, the glorious days of the empire also passed away. Gone were the triumphant processions in the streets of Rome and Constantinople. Gone were the gladiatorial games and chariot races. However, after Justinian's death, the territories of the Eastern Empire didn't die with him. They evolved and thrived for 800 years.
One of the abiding images we have of the Roman Empire is the idea that it declined and it fell. Roman imperial power disappeared in the West. But we often tend to forget that the East continued. It becomes the state that we know as the Byzantine Empire, which goes on for many centuries thereafter. It's actually only extinguished finally in 1453 when the Turks take Constantinople.
The Roman Empire finally fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453. These Muslim people brought the religion of Islam to the city of Constantinople. Churches were eventually converted into mosques. The remnants of the once glorious empire were crumbling away. The Roman Empire was gone, but not forgotten. Its rich legacy still permeates today. Roman art and architecture can be seen in almost every city in the world. Roman literature, law, and language have been studied and adopted by many cultures across the globe. The religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which became part of this lost civilization, thrive to this day, everywhere. The spirit of Rome lives on.
Part of the Roman legacy is the classical tradition. The great works of Greek culture, drama, epic, and Greek traditions of political organization, democracy, the ideal of liberty. These things get taken over into the Roman Empire and get reshaped and preserved, which then influences us to this day.
It's through Rome that that past is made present for us in the late 20th century. Hollywood epics need to be taken very seriously indeed. It's only in those magnificent Hollywood recreations of colour, of pomp, of circumstance, of triumph, of pageantry, that against the fragmentary ruins and remains of the Roman Empire, that we can for a moment sense something of the sheer magnificence that was Rome. We should watch Hollywood movies because they capture for us the glory that was once Rome.
The ancient Romans, then, represent something unique for Western culture. Unique because, on the one hand, they represent something familiar. On the other hand, they represent something strange. Civic architecture, poetry, and comedy are things that we all know from Roman culture. On the other hand, strange things also were indicative of Roman culture. Slavery, which was ubiquitous in ancient Rome, gladiatorial games, these things are odd to us. But perhaps it's this combination of the familiar on the one side and the strange on another, which gives us a perspective to see ourselves.
The famous Roman orator Cicero wrote, "Not to know what happened before we were born is to remain perpetually a child." By knowing the Roman Empire, we can better understand ourselves. For nearly 1,700 years, this awesome empire set the standards for future civilizations to follow. Today, everywhere we look in our art, architecture, government, religions, and system of laws, we are reminded of this lost civilization. We are reminded that there's a bit of Roman blood in all of us. For the History Channel, I'm Joe Mantegna.